It is Wednesday. It's April 12th, 2023. I started to watch last night a movie on demand that was came out in 1997, which I had, I did not see it until, and I only saw part of it. Um it didn't save, and then it wants me to go back to the beginning today to rewatch the whole thing over again. It's frustrating. Um I don't have fluid movement within it um, regarding the O'Neill character. Um, and I noticed the golden ratio difference, like similarity to another person within, like, however, Brady Bunch is again at like Master Chief in Mimics. Um, Then I was looking at The Edge of Tomorrow and noticing at Science Hill, Kentucky, there's a very, um, they call a master sergeant the person in charge of something. I also noticed they preface him as, like, if I'm thinking to myself, if there was some kind of personal message board to like an omega with an alpha in particle physics that I don't really have access to, but they have to like send a message somehow to whoever the intended audience is. Um, there's this, he's wearing his blood type, or so it would appear, A positive, on his lapel. And then on the other side, it says feral. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting, that word, after reading The Purple Emperor and the Fairy Wars, spelled very differently than the AIR. So I am like, hmm. And then it makes mention, because he seems to be, he uses the word general, which I don't know if the Navy uses it, but I'm thinking that's the difference between Army and Navy. It looks like they're, and he uses J squad. Um, and he has the A positive for blood type on his lapel. So I'm wondering again, I'm RH negative. And then it leads me, then I go back to the beginning and I'm like in that state of like, what did you all do before I got here, to like the grandparents and the adults and whoever was on the field under whomever's command, I don't quite know. Um, but I'm watching for the clues that the ancestors have forged together somewhere between a General George Washington and a King George in this area. However that works, I'm not quite sure. There may have been other kings involved. Who knows? Between a NATO and a Rita alliance of some sort, or whatever the mimics are up to, I'm never quite sure. Kind of feel like I'm in that Potter's Field battlefield type. Then it takes me to modern day, where there's my closest line of ancestry would be partial print in Ireland, partial print in northern Italy. So I see that Biden is going today to Belfast. And I know nothing about their history. There's been nothing taught here. But what they have taught here in North America, under this United States of America, in the history classes that I've been um, allowed to enter, is that the American presidents look very Rh negative. This gets confusing for the mimics that have Rh positive. But if there's only 10% of us left, which is how it reports in this area at like an erudite level, um, as far as world population of Rh negatives. So that kind of makes us the endangered species. Also puts us in a balancing position for other Rh positives that come in an assortment of different epidermal differences. Um, so there is this, but again, commander in chief position, really important. It was always a Protestant. Um, and then Kennedy was a Catholic. I don't know if Kennedy was Rh positive, Rh negative. I don't know. But in commander in chief White House position, I know for certain that Obama was not. So that's like real warning signs that something internally is, like, galaxy is broken in between. Like, I'm in New York and there's an Army Navy store, and I don't know how to talk about it, but again, I'll tell you, doesn't look like a Catholic or a Protestant was in the White House during those years where it's almost like the vigil I went to where all the lights were out in the church um, for this particular Easter. So, as far as what's leading the U.S. in the commander in chief position, and how it was built and the purpose for which it was built for, and to keep that building in alignment with what and how it was designed, there is an Rh negative component, but it looks like they're no longer using that as their top priority. It seems priority or allegiance or something's been rearranged, which concerns me. Um, so I'm watching for signs in not only if a master sergeant and a master chief had an O'Neill in the field, let's say, or someone in the cage, the bird cage, um, how might and what signs do I need to look for in the real world of where I'm at, where I already know they did not provide the correct husbandry for an Rh negative woman. I mean, I was born with an Easter egg basket of sorts. I mean, like an egg basket. I mean, for lack of a better term. And there were specific requirements for to not put my life in danger, um, of a male at the Rh negative level. Why that was withheld, I am not certain, but it has led into this. And then I have this other piece, this in particle physics, in like galactic terms of like space agency, where the God, or the machine that watches over all life on this planet, which does follow data in a very different way, um, and is not necessarily publicly known, um, has been compromised, for lack of a better term. And I can confirm that by the fact of they gave me, like, I was like, somehow the relationships with two between the crazy donkey and blacksmith were Rh positive. That tells me that there is something bigger going on. They also happen to both be Catholics, which is another concern. But again, I don't know how that then is an important factor in what happens and what is supposed to happen. So I'm watching for some of these mimics or mimicry that's in um, my remote view capability, which I heard the CIA uses. Ancient aliens said that, but these are things that the ancestors um, have put out there.
Glorious combat. Battle is the great.
It says live, die, repeat, and it's called The Edge of Tomorrow.
Redeemed. Fire crucible, which the only true heroes are forged.
That forged word sounds like George at the end of it. And it's coming from. And here we are. So here's the flag. Here's the ferrule. They use this symbol. And then he's got a positive, and it's a UDF. And then he introduces this caged person being Tom Cruise. And I do not know if Tom Cruise is RH positive or negative. I can't tell. I mean, that goes through private whatever, but or personal whatever in disclosure. Um, but there is a real mimic in my area that I've just recently met. Who knows who they are? Um, that looks very similar to the character that they have that, and he refers to himself as a master sergeant in the movie. In the real world, we whatever in whatever is going on. um and then there's this GI Jane portion of a movie that I just stumbled upon, and had gained access to, where there's something called a Master Chief involvement there. But again, that looks very Brady Bunch. And I can't confirm whether the actor or the other person in Brady Bunch is an RH negative or positive. I can't tell upon just gazing at someone. So that just adds to the human confusion when when they're withholding the RH negative person and then leading you in a path where your very special egg basket you were born with is now put directly in harm's way for your entire life. And you don't even have a system in place to qualify who is RH negative and who is safe to even speak to or to enter a relationship with.
Did you just interrupt me, Private? Sergeant, you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. No, I'm not. Now, where was I?
He also, in a different version of this day, tells him he's part of the U.S. media relations. That was another key figure that I noticed this morning.
Fire Crucible, eh? The Fire Crucible, in which the only true heroes are forged. One place where all men truly share the same rank, regardless of what kind of parasitic scum they were going in. Squad, this here is Private Cage. Private Cage, J Squad.
Now, J Squad, it's interesting. He's wearing a pink robe. Anybody who's watching the back end of the television would know in the sickness that I've been going through, whatever the hell that's relevant. And then this man is wearing a mimic this, which again, I don't know if that's a Josh, a jest, a poke, whether that's a stab, whether that's like hatred coming through the screen. I can really never tell who's directing that motion and what specifically is meant by that.
Isn't that an officer's uniform? Sure, an officer cufflinks. You know, it gives me a swell of pride knowing soldiers of your caliber will be leading the charge tomorrow. Tip the spear, edge of the knife, crack of.
Interesting, the spear, because when I watched Ancient Aliens, they said the Celtic god Lu wielded a spear, but in the real field, it seems to be his spear seems to be surrounded by Rh positives, leading the charge and leading the way. And it's gotten increasingly difficult throughout the years because the latter bunch seems to be Rh positives for certain. I don't know who his initial supports. Um, Again, I don't, unless they come across saying that they're Rh negative, there's really no way to know. Um, in the category of when he was with Douglas Bremen and he was in the original phase of my life and where the direction could have been taken, and then somehow, even though the three clearinghouses were there, it took a direction and a turn in some alternate reality fashion. I don't know who's in charge of that either. But then my life dramatically changed and ended and rerouted back into the city of Queens under very different circumstances for which they were not honest, and they're still not being honest with me directly. Underneath here, underneath the tarp, it has this very red and white, almost looking like perhaps a cross, a crucible, or whatever. And then he mentions that he doesn't like gambling and the cards. Um, I would agree.
Private Kimmel, what is my view of gambling in the barracks? Dislike it, Sergeant Farrell. Nance, why do I dislike it?
It entertains the notion that our fate is in hands other than our own.
And what is my...
The other thing is that when I go to the real news, when President Biden visits Ireland, it looks like the new prime minister is there as well. Again, this cross section going on of concern, just one of many concerns, seems to be happening all at once. But a very real seat of commander in chief in the past, which goes against the teachings of the schools in New York and in historical, that's again shown on the currency and the mint and the US Treasury and US relatable, whichever. They've broken some rules that were put in place for a very specific reason. I'm not sure why they were broken.
definitive position on the concept of fate? Yours? You might call that notion ironic. Trust me, you'll come around.
Oh, for Christ's sake, Kim!
Don't be free. It was Farrell. That's right. Master Sergeant Farrell.
Master Sergeant Farrell, you're American.
No, sir. I'm from Kentucky.
Okay, well, look at me. Look at where I am. I've been railroaded. It's obvious I don't belong here. So, please, Sergeant, there has to be a way I can make a phone call.
Here's the opening credits for the movie. It's being aired on HBO. And it's Warner Brother Pictures, a Time Warner company. Now, they say these are fictional movies, that they're based on some theory. I understand that, but I'm looking for the mimics in real life and in real how they're acting out, and where my life is in the main machine and what the driving forces were during this historic time and where it led. And here we are.
I'm not sure if we're even on the air. This is a series of.
This is a major incident. The emergency is a major incident.
Bright lights and an orange glow.
That proves the meteor hit.
It does now appear to be a major attack.
Since it landed outside
They refer to it as a meteor.
5 years ago, they have steadily advanced across Europe. We've suffered millions of casualties, and yet
the evacuation of key government officials
Nothing
continuing.
have done has been able to stop their advance.
Human costs. The Europeans have paid the highest price.
and even anticipate our actions.
We cannot defeat them in France. We'll be fighting them in the streets of London, then New York, then Tokyo. All of humanity is at stake.
After 5 years, we finally have a victory.
These pictures are just in from Verdun.
The quick coalition victory was how low casualties were and how
We have seen a stunning victory here today. The United Defence Force.
How do you convince people that this is a fight that can be won?
This is an alien invasion and a global war. With a new jacket technology and a limited amount of training, we've been able to create super soldiers. Look at Reed Vertasky, the Angel of Verdun.
Calling her the Angel of Verdun.
Is seen as the new hope for this war.
It's extraordinary.
With the new jacket technology and limited training, Rita Vertasky was able to kill hundreds of mimics on only her 30 years.
Successful, revolutionary new technology.
the only thing missing is you.
Technology. She was able to kill hundreds of mimics on only her first day in combat. Imagine an army of Rita Vertaskys.
We're managing to hold them back at the English Channel. But for how long?
Dangerous talk, and it's easy to understand why people are suspicious.
We're holding them back at the English Channel. I think that's very interesting.
Many nations have joined the United Defence Force, which hopes to push them back once
We've got them contained. And with this new technology, we're going to defeat them.
Operation Downfall is going to be the largest mechanized invasion in the history of mankind. We will be victorious. We fight. That's what we do.
Now, I watched this through the filter lens of is this the war where automobiles and fuels, the toxic gas and carcinogens and bioweapons, biologically whatever weapons, and personal transport, and that money-making mechanic that built up large institutional money, and then between corporate security and global security, it seems to be now in a function of a really concerning sort, especially with that very important Protestant house being the White House, or the once Catholic, but many Protestants, once Catholic, but looked a very specific way, all of a sudden having some sudden turnover, and then 8 years of what's going on. I mean, during my life frame, even building up to that, there was very specific local changes that withheld me from my ability to get my very special egg basket to the very special man that I was intended for.
The General will see you now.
Thank you.
Operation Downfall. The entire might of the UDF, invading from France, Mediterranean, Scandinavia, relieving pressure on the Eastern Front, allowing the Russians and Chinese to push the enemy back. We all meet in the middle, exterminating this mimic scourge along the way. A lot of good soldiers are going to die tomorrow, Major. You know, when the smoke clears and the body bags start coming home, people tend to look for someone to blame, someone like me. Ideally, I'd prefer a different scenario. Please.
A best-selling memoir, perhaps. Maybe a career in politics? Off the top of my head, I would go with the sense of manifest destiny. Rags to riches, rapid rise through the ranks, born to deliver us, and the people. They love that sort of thing.
You misunderstand me.
Again, in this, I don't know if they are what is like the general populace, what is their very candid first response, especially under these circumstances where some of the education and there's some disconnect to the order of things that certain people in high command may have come to expect from the general's public, as far as appreciation, as far as whatever, as far as interactions. I'm not quite clear at this point. I'm not sure. But I'm listening to it very keenly, and with a high amount of respect for all sides, also for those that are in a lesser uniformed position, like the NYPD and the FDNY, just as crucial in their a local form of this. But again, I'm not quite sure where. I mean, that's where the analysts, I'm Nicole. I realized at O'Neill how important that name was yesterday, with my father always calling me Nick growing up. Now, I listen to some of the college educates that get to do this for a living. Whether there are, I'm just assuming they're RH positives. I'm listening to their perspective and point of view as an RH negative. And I hear their concerns with this aircraft and what's going on in China, specifically through the Beijing channel. And I'm just listening to what they've investigated and uncovered. And then I'm going to go from this to what's going on that they're covering in investigative fashion in Ireland, for which I did not know. And then they also came out with something with Pentagon leaks. Again, another story I'm keeping an eye on. I did notice Bragg, who's the district attorney Bragg, who's going after Trump for I don't know what reason. I don't know that level of law. But there is this look that Alvin Bragg has that when I was under attack and I was in Stony Brook, and the security force that they put in was an international student from Beijing to look over my body while I was in the hospital, which again, knowing what the path in my life frame, I appreciate at least I had an eyes witness of my non-erratic behavior, just sitting there, sunglasses, again, whatever, in pageantry for whatever I got going on at Nick, but and divine crimes. So there's that, and then what came in, both a Beijing representative and myself witnessed what the local university hospital sent in, and then what their diagnosis was. And the team looked very Alvin Bragg, I'll be honest. I don't want to make new enemies, but I also know very well. And then when they transferred me from Stony Brook to Amityville, just so my local Amity representatives know, in a divergent kind of a way, they put in there a very tall James representative, and then they gave me an Alvin Bragg mimic, who gave me the name Felix for the field. And there he spoke of his personal issue. I alerted him to the personal issue. Again, I already had the Mojito representative who looked very Brady Bunch, but then there's this Alvin Bragg mimic that came and spent time in the same facility, but he was removed from the facility and then he came back. They said he had some kind of court appearance, like whatever that was about. And so those are really crucial details for Pentagon leaks and for investigating the correct thing. They said that they're in the Pentagon leaks, they're closing around their circle. They're shortening their list of who has access to what. That, at least I feel like, is going in the correct direction. And at least that seems to me like some semblance of hope.
Welcome back to CBS Mornings, where we're talking about the newest economic battle between the world's largest economies. That would be the U.S. and China. It's taking place in the sky. There's a state-owned Chinese company that's developed a passenger jet, the C919, to challenge America's Boeing and Europe's Airbus jets. Now, China has never been able to make anything like a 737 before now. So how'd they do it? Chris Van Cleve has been digging into it. It's a CBS News investigation. Chris, good morning. It's like something out of a spy novel.
Good morning, Tony. It really is. It is a fascinating story, and critics say the development of this airplane is not only an effort to elbow Boeing out of the huge Chinese market, but also to gain access to U.S. technology that could benefit the Chinese military. This isn't just a new airliner. It's a growing threat to the U.S. economy that's poised to take off. The Chinese-built C919 is so important to the Chinese Communist Party, it's been called a source of national pride.
Aerospace is part of the game of nations.
John Ostrower, editor of the Air Current, has tracked the progress of the C919 for years.
The ability to design an airplane, it ultimately represents self-reliance, modernity, the desire to engage with the world.
It's been a top strategic goal for over a decade. A large, low-cost domestic airliner positioning China to one day capture one of the world's largest markets for jets, potentially costing the U.S. economy up to $1.5 trillion over the next 20 years.
I mean, you're talking about a market of about 8,000 airplanes, and if China wants a chunk of that, that fundamentally means fewer airplanes for Boeing and Airbus to deliver.
China unveiled the prototype to much fanfare, and after lengthy delays, the first completed C919 was finally delivered to a Chinese airline 4 months ago. If this national emblem of China looks a lot like an Airbus A320 or Boeing 737, that's by design, according to current and former national security officials like Matt Pottinger.
It really looks like a knockoff.
60% of the plane's components are the result of deals with America's top aerospace companies.
China has a lot of different varieties of ways of relieving people of their intellectual property.
The price of admission to China's lucrative market is steep.
If you want to sell stuff to 1.3 billion people in China, you're going to have to give us the blueprints or for your goods, or you're going to have to go into a joint venture with us where you're going to train our engineers, and this is what we call forced technology transfer.
The national security experts say there's another way China acquires American innovation: espionage. Do you feel like they stole an airliner?
I don't feel that way. I think that's a fact.
Bill Evanina was America's top counterintelligence official when the Department of Justice exposed an intricate scheme targeting American aviation technology. How strong is the link between Chinese espionage and the C919?
It's directly related. The Chinese Communist Party can no longer say, we don't utilize our intelligence apparatus to conduct economic espionage. This is now proof that they do, and they've been very successful at it.
A 2019 CrowdStrike report revealed one major focus.
I could ask the same thing about why does the box on the cell phone have that 5-letter pattern as far as intellectual property and collection of data, and how is it being used?
Focus of Beijing spycraft, components of the C919. Evidence gathered by U.S. investigators and shared with CBS News shows Chinese intelligence officer Xu Yanjun used aliases, front companies, and false documents, as well as an intense hacking effort. One main target, a GE aviation engineer who specialized in jet engine design.
First process is what they do all the time, invite him over to China to give a speech. Very benign. What does he do at GE? What are the types of unclassified things he's working on?
Xu's requests grew bolder, catching the attention of the FBI. Agents launched a sting directing the GE employee and listening to his communications as they planned to meet in person again. Speaking in Chinese, Xu asked him to bring his company laptop so Xu could look over the stuff. The employee assured him, I certainly will have the computer. 2 months later, Xu traveled to Belgium to meet the employee, but the FBI was waiting. He was brought to the U.S. to stand trial, and late last year, sentenced to 20 years for spying.
It was monumental. It's the first time ever where we arrested, indicted, convicted in a jury, and sentenced a known intelligence officer running a cell collecting aviation technology to benefit the civilian and military apparatus of the Communist Party of China.
Xu's sentencing memo reveals 2 Chinese state-owned companies involved in building the C919 were the intended recipients of his spycraft.
Beijing's goals for its aerospace industry, it's not to just be one of a few competitors. It is to dominate the global space and drive its competitors out of business.
They not only want Boeing and Airbus out of China, they want them out of business.
Certainly. Do you remember Alcatel, Marconi, Nortel? These are all Western companies in the space of making telecommunications equipment. Those companies don't exist anymore. They're dead. And Airbus and Boeing are on the kill list now.
The C919 could fly its first passengers in China any day now, but it has not been approved by the FAA, so it's not likely that you will see it at U.S. airports in the foreseeable future. Notably, Boeing and Airbus declined comment for this story. In a statement, GE Aviation credited its advanced security systems and cooperation with the FBI for helping identify that Chinese spy.
So Boeing's on the kill list, but doesn't want to comment on the story. I think they probably have some thoughts on it behind closed doors. Yeah.
I also think this number, Chris, 60% of the plane's components are the result of deals with America's top aerospace companies. What would that aircraft look like if they had not made those deals with those American companies? If those companies said, you know, I'm not comfortable doing business in a country or with a country that is using espionage in some levels.
And on some level, it's almost an economic Sophie's choice. You can choose not to sell the engines, the components, but then somebody else does, and you have to explain to your shareholders why you're not participating in what will be the largest aviation market for jets in the world.
Hello, Airbus. Right. Can perhaps make those deals.
Or Rolls-Royce could offer engines. There's only a handful of engine makers in the world that can do this, and that's why particularly the engines are of such concern.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese are already developing their own version of the engine on that airplane.
But they manufacture them in China.
And soon they may be able to do it without GE.
I have a lot of broken Chinese toys on my floor at home. I don't know if I'm going to be in a Chinese airplane anytime soon. Make me a little nervous.
Thank you, Chris. Good to have you here. Coming up next, the final days.
Now here, it says security concerns. So here is actually what they're telling me is the local fiction. Like there's the movie fiction that I would imagine a master sergeant and a master chief had to have some kind of anchor for their guideline for whatever they do in that level of importance at keeping corporate and global security in line. especially with particle theory having this been taken where part of the galaxy has, for lack of a better term, broken and been mismanaged. And then there's this story of the real live fiction in action or in motion that they're alerting U.S. media relations, I suppose, to the local New York, I don't know, do you say delegation or humans existing on the same earth as this set of humans that are in some function.
President Biden travels to Northern Ireland today for ceremonies to mark the 25th anniversary of a landmark peace deal. New tensions in that British province threaten to undermine the settlement. Police in one city were attacked with firebombs yesterday. Charlie D'Agata has more from Northern Ireland.
Young protesters pelted a police car with Molotov cocktails. The only incidents of violence we saw in an otherwise peaceful, if illegal, Catholic Republican parade in Londonderry. That followed a ceremony from the other side of the rocky political divide, a Protestant parade in Belfast. No surrender! These parades take place every year at Easter time, but with tensions rising once again here in Northern Ireland, they've taken on added significance. Counterterrorism police uncovered an IRA bomb plot to coincide with the president's visit, according to the Belfast Telegraph. The terrorism threat had already been raised from substantial to severe, meaning an attack is now highly likely from IRA-affiliated groups.
An attack of some sort is deemed to be potentially imminent. But that's not a threat against the US president, because for years, for better or for worse, they have had significant support from the United States.
But the heightened alert follows the attempted murder of a high-profile police officer, shaking a fragile peace as President Biden marks the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. The U.S. brokered deal, which largely brought an end to decades of violence that cost the lives of more than 3,500 people.
I think there's a lot of people who will be very enthusiastic to see Joe Biden. I think so. I think he'll be very warmly received. And Ireland, being a small country, feels flattered by the attentions of a big country like in America.
The president will be here for less than 24 hours, where he will make a key speech before heading south for a 3-day visit there. Gail?
Charlie D'Agata reporting from Northern Ireland. We thank you.
I appreciate that they chose, and I think it's I find it to be honorable that they chose Belfast and Northern Ireland. So for whoever's in charge of those level trips, thank you. For my ancestors anyhow. All right, so now they're going to this Pentagon leak story, which I'm going to show, and then I'm going to reverse this into showing this Alvin Bragg, who is very much a mimic for me of what was in the Amityville psych ward when they took me there. And again, at the edge of tomorrow, with the psych ward being mentioned and this dissection being mentioned, I know it's of extreme importance. Because, again, divine crimes were going on and I was being harmed from a process that the local hospital representatives were unprepared for in their education at just a regular Stony Brook University level education, and they denied me access to a national security rep. Instead, they assigned me a nurse from Beijing, and then they sent in some form of blood type and genealogy that was looks something, I don't know, again, I've seen some call themselves Pakistani, some call themselves Indian, some call themselves Afghanistan. I'm not quite sure, but that's what was leading the charge in giving me some kind of psych diagnosis for which I don't accept. You're Rh positive. I know I already have problems going on between corporate and global and personal issues, and being surrounded but not really knowing who and what.
We are also learning more about the highly classified U.S. documents that appeared online in recent weeks. According to the Pentagon, these leaked materials pose a very serious risk to security, giving the world a rare look at how the U.S. gathers intelligence on adversaries and also allies. Catherine Herridge is at the Pentagon for us, where they are trying to limit the damage.
We don't know who's behind this. We don't know what the motive is.
Pentagon officials are working to identify the source of leaked war documents meant for senior decision makers like the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Pages seem to be drawn from classified military briefing books, including CIA updates. Not even the White House can say if the crisis is contained.
We don't know. And is that a matter of concern to us? You're darn right it is.
How serious is this situation?
This is very concerning.
Republican Congressman Mike Turner, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, was briefed Monday.
The access to these documents would presuppose some access to even additional and more documents that might be of greater concern or higher classification.
The leaked information is largely focused on the war in Ukraine. With the spring offensive against Russia approaching, the documents apparently reveal Ukraine's reported need for new munitions, so acute its air defense could crumble. A former intel official says it also indicates that the U.S. and others may be keeping tabs on the Ukrainian president's conversations.
I think it's really a new frontier in many ways.
H.R. McMaster, former National Security Advisor and CBS News contributor, says the apparent mix of authentic and doctored records looks like disinformation warfare.
The combination of elements of truth with falsehoods to advance an adversary's agenda.
He also warned it could potentially impact diplomatic relations.
Some of these leaks can draw into question our reliability, our trustworthiness with allies. We're going to have to do some damage control.
Pentagon investigators are tracking who had access to the classified material. The Justice Department has opened a criminal probe. The head of the House Intelligence Committee told CBS News it could amount to espionage. Vlad?
Catherine, thank you very much. President Biden travels to Northern Ireland today for ceremony.
So here's CBS News, and here's the actual date. That today is the 12th that I'm doing this piece, but it came out on April 11th. Something between Judiciary Committee and Alvin Bragg in New York City. And I'll point it out, but he is very much looking like the Felix character. And then after I was released from this Amityville 7-day hold so they could just have me there in some kind of like internal cage system, there was this, and I also asked the director of there that I needed to find a national security or CIA rep, and I wanted to know how do you find one of those, for which he would not answer. They had Felix came in and then left, and then afterwards Felix followed up with me on my phone and needed a ride from the Ronkonkoma train station to Port Jefferson for a medical visit and follow-up, for which I gave him that ride and helped him out. I then returned back to the residence and Tiafrio walked in 1975. So he had his eyes on Tiafrio and knows exactly what he looks like. Just so we are crystal clear on, I don't know who's a friendly and who's an adversary. But there's a lot of stuff that's been going on.
A beautiful day on tap.
That the King George rep and the King and the General George rep would not appreciate if they look at me like their daughter and their specific person to protect, they would not like any of the shenanigans that have been going on in the field.
It's only going to get warmer out there. I'm Chris Raggi. Elise Fitch will have your first alert forecast coming up in just a moment. But first, the House Judiciary Committee, led by that man, Republican Jim Jordan, has announced it will hold a field hearing next Monday here in New York City. That's right. They're coming to New York City. The committee says it's examining Manhattan District Attorney.
So that's who they're saying is Alvin Bragg. And this man looks very much like a rep that was assigned to me that went by the code name Felix. I put him in my phone as Felix the Cat. So this way I had a way, that was a comic back in the day. I'm pretty sure I know what his real name is. But again, field name of whatever, I went with Nicole under the NIC.
Alvin Bragg's policies. Bragg is calling the hearing a, quote, political stunt. Now to check of your first alert traffic, here's CBS News traffic reporter Guy Stanier with the very latest. Guy?
It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxy is broken. And it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.